Hello everyone and welcome back to MixBuzz TV mixing and mastering tutorials on YouTube. I'm your host David, and with this video, with this podcast, I will try to cover all the variables, go through the thought process and give you all the information, tips and tricks on how to make one of the most important choices you have to make when mixing, which is choosing the right compressor for your tube bus. I know this subject is deep, very deep, but I will try to cover all the scenarios I can think about. But obviously I won't be able to cover every possible situation. And so if after listening to the podcast you have doubts or you want to ask specific questions, write it in the comment down below. So tube bus compression, first thing first, how much should it affect the overall sound of your mix? What should you expect from your tube bus compressor? How much of a difference should it make when you bypass it versus when you activate it? Whether you use plug-in or hardware units, you already know the answer, and it kind of sucks. The answer is it depends. It depends on so many things, it's not even funny, but let's try. First one is the genre. Some genre benefit from heavy tube bus compression. Some others sounds better with little to no overall compression on the mix bus. So this one is out of the way. Nobody can tell but you. Is a case-by-case thing. You can teach the technical aspects of things, how to use something, but you can't teach good taste. Nobody can. Usually genres like pop, rock, metal, hip-hop, EDM are where we hear quite a lot of compression on individual elements as well as on the tube bus. Classical, jazz, ballads, ethnic music is where open and wide dynamic usually sound better and more natural. What are the things you should focus on when choosing the tube bus compressor? Before we dig into that, there's something to say about when turning the tube bus compressor on and start setting it up. I'm among those engineers that do the level and pan only rough mix and then pick my tube bus compressor right away and mix into it. Why? Well, we all know this. Tube bus compression is something that can dramatically change the tone and the vibe of your mix and be a big part of the overall sound. And you don't want to mix your song, then slap a compressor on the tube bus only to realize that you have to almost mix your song from scratch because the compressor changed the tone and the balances so much. On the other hand, it is very possible to do so, to put the tube bus compressor almost at the end of the mix. This is if you apply very little compression, let's say 1 to 3 dB, with a compressor that is not heavily colored. I've done this several times, so both are viable options. I just use the first one more often. So what are the factors to take into account when picking your tube bus compressor among the 1,000 choices that we have? Obviously, this whole podcast is a big-ass generalization, which I'm never a fan of, but let's take this into account and just use it as a general guideline. I decided to pick what, in my opinion, are the 6 most important factors. The genre, what element or elements drive the song, the frequency content, the BPM, how much compression you're going to apply, and lastly, if you want to hear your compressor working or not. These factors are strictly linked one to another. Don't try to go through each one of them individually. Keep them all in mind at all time. For example, first factor, the genre. Some genre require more overall compression, some other little to none. And this takes us right up to the 5th factor. Do you want to hear the compressor or not? If I'm going to apply a lot of compression on my tube bus for a pop, rock, hip-hop, EDM track, these are genres where we want to hear the compressor working, and they often require a good amount of gain reduction. On EDM, we want to hear the compressor pumping. On pop and rock, we are used to hear everything in your face and pretty squeezed, but punchy, with transients hitting hard. On hip-hop, we want the compressor to move with the beat, but at the same time keep the vocals steady and pushed. In this case, it's a safe bet to say we want a decent amount of compression, and we want the tube bus compressor to be a big part of the overall sound. So what do we pick? Dividing compressor for type, topology, we have VCAs, Opto, FET, and Vari-MU compressors. We already have a video on the differences between these types of compressors in the Ultimate Compressor tutorial. I'll put the link here and down below in the comment section. Go watch it if you haven't already. So the genre will most likely dictate what topology of compressor you want to reach for. And for modern music in general, VCAs compressor are what we often see on the 2-bus. VCAs are solid state. Some of the usual suspects in this family are the SSL G-Comp, the API 2500, and many others. Especially today, we have a great selection of both new design, reissues, and clones. Punchy, snappy, in your face is what you should picture when you think VCAs compressor. They can be both very colored or extremely transparent. We are talking about the tone of the compressor, just running material through them. But their action is generally pretty obvious, and that's usually what we want when we pick a VCA compressor. We want to hear it working. We want to hear the snap, the pump, the breathing. Again, not necessarily the case, but it's a pretty common choice. VCAs are very reactive, so they can take care of fast transients and fast BPM material. They are usually equipped with a lot of controls that allow deep tweaking, so they are usually versatile enough for most material. Another option could be FET compressors. These can also be a good pick for the 2-bus. The FET circuit tries to recreate tube saturation in a solid-state design, so they are usually more colored than VCAs, just passing audio through them, and usually the more you drive them, the more color you get. They tend, because of that, to nicely round off the transients level-wise, but also enhance the perception of those transients with saturation. You can imagine already these two characteristics alone will most likely change the sound of your mix quite a bit. In fact, they can be a little too heavy-handed for 2-bus duties, unless they have a way to control the saturation separately from the gain reduction. 1176 is the first compressor that comes to mind for single tracks or buses when speaking about FET compressors, but they are rarely used on the 2-bus. And just to give you an affordable and good sounding example of a FET compressor that can be used on the 2-bus, the new Drummer 1978 would definitely be my first choice. In fact, that's exactly what I use these days, not only for the degree of control over the internal sidechain, but also because it has that independent control for the saturation that we talked about earlier. For ballad, classical, more soft-sounding material in general, when you don't need a lot of gain reduction, and or you don't necessarily want to hear the compressor working hard, Opto compressors can be a choice. These are generally slower than VCAs. They usually have a slower attack compared to the other types of compressors. They can be program dependent due to their topology, and because of this, they do sound very musical and very natural. They can add a nice cohesive feeling without eating transients. They usually have soft knees, and so again, they can sound very natural, but also a little too soft on punchy material, or be just the ticket if the material is too pokey. Either they have tube in them or not, Opto compressors do add a pretty recognizable movement, I'd call it, to the material. But watch the release, because the way Optos work, the release can sound weird even if it's in time with the song. So my advice is, yes, start with the release in time, but go by ear. Because even given the same release time, Opto compressor will feel slower than FET and VCAs. Watch the video on our ultimate tutorial if you're interested in going into detail on the release difference subject. Link here and in the info box down below. As far as transparent action, Vari-MU compressors could be considered a first choice, but they are usually seen in mastering more often than on the 2-bus. The way they apply the compression is very transparent. Their action can really be invisible to their knee and their design. These type of compressors can both be very colored or very clean, but they are usually pretty slow, although some new design give us Vari-MU compressors that are faster than what we are used to see in vintage designs. Ballads, vocal-driven songs. These are few examples where you can try a Vari-MU on the 2-bus as a main compressor. And I say as a main compressor because it's not uncommon to see the Vari-MU used after a VCA, where the VCA takes care of the dynamic and the Vari-MU provides just the last 1 or 2 dB of what we call glue. So far we covered the genres and the cases in which you want to hear the compressor working or not. BPM, the tempo of your song. This is not a massive factor nowadays, as we have compressors in every family we mentioned with extensive controls for attack and release, but usually if you have a fast BPM, you want to avoid what we call sluggish compressors, either because they are just too slow attack and release wise, or because the way they apply compression is too soft. Maybe they have a too soft of a knee, or the way they react to the material just doesn't flow with a fast song. Pay attention to that. Another factor is how much compression are you going to apply. Well, this probably will change during the course of your mix, but let's try to picture some scenarios. If you know you're going for just 2 or 3 dB of compression, well, in this case, you can probably pick anything you want, meaning as long as you like the color of a given compressor, you have the controls you need for attack and release, you just have to decide if that little compression is gonna be glue, snap, punch, softness, and pick the right topology accordingly. What I'm trying to say here is with such little compression going on, there's really not that much damage you can do if the mix is well balanced and is where you want it to be. The 2-bus compressor in this case won't make such a huge difference as in the previous examples. If instead you know your mix will require squeezing, which should be for the feeling, the vibe, not for the level, link to another video about this here and in the info box down below, then you gotta pay more attention to the topology. Do you want it to pump? Do you want the snappy transients? Do you want to add some grit, some aggressiveness and saturation? Then a VCA or a FET is probably a good choice. Do you want transparent dynamic control that musically follow your track? Then a combination of a transparent VCA and a Vari-MU or an Opto are your best bet. Then the last factors. What drives your song? Is it the vocal? Is it the drum, guitars, a big acoustic or a piano? What element or elements give the song its groove? Is it an, quote, on-grid track like EDM or hip-hop or metal? Is it a ballad that it has its own flow without a strict time signature? You need to think about these things and pick accordingly. And this ties up to the other factor, the frequency content. What range has the most energy? Let's say it's an electric guitar driven rock track with punchy drums where the vocals are buried in the mix. Pick something that will complement the tone of the guitars and that will move and breathe with the drums, because those two elements are what are going to trigger your compressor. Again, VCA and FET are great for this. If the song is a ballad where the big vocal is the driving element, then let the compressor be triggered by it. So when the singer is not singing, the compressor will gently rise the level of the music. Vari-MU are awesome in my opinion for this. Do you have a trap or EDM track where the beat is the driving element and you have a huge low end? Then make sure you pick something that handles low end compression well. Watch for distortion. Saturation is okay when it's masked, but audible distortion on the low end, not so much unless you want that kind of sound. Pick something that has an internal sidechain, a high-pass filter on board so your low end won't be choked and the compressor won't be over-triggered by it. And these are just few examples. It would be impossible to cover all the options and all the scenarios. Plus, many compressors have enough parameters to tweak so to make them work and fit most material nowadays. But my last piece of advice is this. Try to pick a very simple compressor for your 2-bus as a first choice, one that has little controls. Start with the studio standards, the ones that we know worked on countless records, and for a reason. They don't usually require endless tweaking, but they have just enough controls to make them work for the song. Pay attention to the tone, listen to how it works on both the quiet parts as well as the loudest parts. And if you can get away with a compressor that has few controls is always better in my opinion, because the less tweaking you need on your 2-bus means that your mix is well balanced to begin with. And if that's the case, it will sound better without having to work too hard. And a balanced mix will always have great potential for loudness. So another thing to take into account. So this is it for today. I hope this was useful. As I said at the beginning, this is a big ass generalization that you don't have to take as dogma. It's just my attempt to give you a general guideline, a starting point for your 2-bus compression. If you have any question, please write it in the comments, and even if you don't have questions, comment anyway. Let me know if this type of video podcasts is something you enjoy or not. If you like the video, please click the like button. It's very important. Join us on Facebook and Twitter. We communicate with you through those pages. Giveaways take place in there. We take requests and suggestions for new videos, and so make sure you're following us on Facebook and Twitter. Support us by sharing the videos on social media, blogs, and forums. Subscribe if you haven't already, and see you next time.